On this Monday, May 4th, it's been a fairly decent day, a little overcast late in the day, a couple of raindrops, but for the most part, a nice day on this fourth day in May. Um, the news has been about more of the same, I'd say, more than anything else. Let me get to a couple of sports things first. Number one, we obviously begin with the passing of Don Shula at the age of 90. For anybody really under the age of, I'd say, 75, who has been an NFL fan, the familiar face, the familiar outline of Don Shula is one that is as emblematic of the NFL as anything. Don Shula was as a familiar silhouette of the National Football League as the logo was. For fans like myself who have been around the league for a very long time, or people in the media who have been around the league for a very long time, or anybody who has made a living in the NFL, they always think of the league as having Shula in it. There's some personalities that just seem like they've always been and will always be part of this league. And Don Shula is one of those. The winningest coach in the history of the sport. A man who came to coaching at a very young age, who then, after losing a game that was as important as any game ever played in the NFL, he went on to the Dolphins and built them into this dynasty, led them to the only perfect season in history, led them to back-to-back Super Bowl wins, and then coached for a very, very long time. I mean, for as long as you could think of the league, you thought of the Dolphins, and there was Don Shula. He will be a part of this league for as long as they play football. He will be remembered as one of the real iconic figures in the history of this league. 347 wins. As I said, 2 championships. The most startling thing about Shula is that you look back and realize that somehow a championship evaded he and Dan Marino. A coach like that with a quarterback like that, you would have figured, and they did go to a Super Bowl obviously very early in Dan's career, and never got back to another one. And lost that one to the great Niner team. But he never got back to another Super Bowl with Dan. Counting the Colts, he was in 6 Super Bowls. He won 2. Won a pair of championships. Obviously had so many winning seasons. Was such a big part of the league. For many, many years, he was probably the most defining symbol of the league. After Vince Lombardi left, he was the most defining symbol of the league. Rock-jawed, always considered to be clean-cut, always stood for what was solid in the league. And that was Shula. He went on, obviously, to a lot of success in other endeavors, his steakhouses. His sons coached in football. So he's really been part of the game for as long as a lot of us can ever remember. Well, for most of us, we never remember the league without Don Shula. Lived a very, very long life. 90 years. And as we know, stayed active and stayed as one of the real fixtures of the sport, and has been since the days that he has been around since he coached his last game. Coached for a very long time. Was a player in the league before that. Was a head coach at the age of 33. And obviously spent most of his life as a head coach, and goes down as the winningest coach in history. Not the best coach in history. There have been better. There have been more winning coaches. There's guys I would put ahead of Shula on the list. But he did win the most games, and he did have the only perfect season. And I think that does not get the credit that it deserves. I always choose the Dolphins. When I used to vote NFL films or whatever one they would have in my day when I was a part of all those voting things that the NFL would have, I would always vote their team, even though I was not the closest guy to Don Shula at all. Don Shula got angry at me a couple of times about me taking a couple of shots at his kids. I didn't really take any shots at him because there weren't many shots to take. But I did take a couple of his kids when they were coordinators, and he didn't like that, which, hey, that's how fathers are supposed to be. So I didn't have a problem with that. But I always credited them for the undefeated season because I think it is so hard to accomplish. And we saw it with the great Pat team, just how hard it is to do. So many things that can happen. And they did it. And they didn't have, if you ask me, they're the greatest collection of talent ever on one team, I'd say no. But here's one thing they did that nobody else did. They won every game and went on to win the championship that year. And that you can't take away from them because no one else has ever done it. And if it's so easy to do, then let somebody else duplicate it. And nobody else has. And you watch the weight that teams try to carry when they get late in the season with an undefeated season. And even the great Pat team, you could see it coming. That team was running out of gas in the playoffs from the strain of trying to go undefeated. It is something that is just very difficult to do. And it's obviously it's something Shula took to his grave as the reigning achievement. That and the fact he was the winningest coach of all time. So there are a few guys who are just part of the landscape. They're part of the portrait. Shula's one of those guys. And he always will be one of those guys. As we do each day, I started doing this last week. I take my two favorite guys, Bernie Williams and Mickey Mantle, my two favorite players ever, both center fielders, switch-hitting center fielders for the Yankees. And I follow them through each day and pick their best May 4th. For Bernie today, I picked May 4th, 1999. Yankees lost the game 8-5 to the Twins. Bernie went 2 for 4 with 3 RBIs. He hit a solo homer, and he hit a 2-run homer. He hit one from the right side, one from the left side. It left him on this 4th day of May, and he's not usually a quick starter, batting .304, which was good for him, with 4 homers and 14 RBIs. And that day, hitting home runs from both sides of the plate, a 2-run homer and in the second inning and a solo shot in the 8th inning. One from the left side, one from the right side. For Mickey, we came upon 2 games today. The first one, and there will be a lot from 1956, which was his Triple Crown and one of the greatest years anyone ever had. The Yankees moved to 10-5 on the season with a 10-6 win over the A's. Mickey on 5/4/56 went 2 for 3 with 2 runs scored, 2 RBIs, 2 walks, always walks. So 2 for 3, 2 runs scored, 2 RBIs, 2 walks. That left him for the season with 20 RBIs on just May 4th, and he was batting .411 with a .500 on-base percentage. And that year he had a brilliant season, winning the Triple Crown. We also looked at 1961, another great year when Mantle hit 54 home runs as he chased Roger Maris for the home run mark. He went 2 for 4 on this May 4th with a 2-run home run. And he was batting .348 on May 4th with 9 home runs and 24 RBIs already. Already had 9 home runs and 24 RBIs on May 4th. Off to a phenomenal season, and he got off to a red-hot start. And then Ralph Houck switched Mickey and Roger. Roger got off to a slow start. Mickey got off to a torrid start. Then they switched them in the lineup. Put Mickey up 4th and Maris up 3rd. to get Maris some fastballs, and Mickey wasn't thrilled about it, but didn't complain. And then Maris went on an incredible tear. But at this point, Mickey was on fire. 348 with a 421 on base percentage, 9 homers, 24 RBIs on this May 4th. That was 1961, the year he went on to hit 54 home runs. If you watch Billions last night, it took a little while to get into it. It was an odd show. Okay, I'll be the first to admit it. The first one of the year wants to set a lot of parameters. This one set a lot of parameters and did a lot of odd things last night, to say the least. So if you want to say that it was an odd Billions, I'll agree with you. But you always want to give them a little leeway with the first show of the year. And then if you watch the 2 episodes of the Jordan documentary, they got a lot into the 92-93 Nick Bull playoff series and the whole gambling thing and everything. Even saw me in there. I guess it's the second time. Someone told me that I made a cameo last week in it. I don't remember. And then yesterday, a couple people told me beforehand that I was going to be in it, and I was in it last night shortly about Jordan's Atlantic City foray. I remember that series very well. And I have to admit, coming off the first 2 games, when the Knicks beat them, I really thought the Bulls I thought something was wrong. I remember that. They didn't perform well in Game 2 in the fourth quarter. Michael didn't perform well in the fourth quarter. Now, the Bulls were always the better team. Not only did they have the best player, they were always the better team. And one of the big things was Bulls' defense and the fact that to find that other guy to score for the Knicks was a big issue. And I remember Game 3 was a complete romp. And Pippen had a big Game 3. Matter of fact, it was one of those rare games where Jordan wasn't a leading scorer. Pippen was a leading scorer in that game. Jordan wasn't. Pippen had 29, Jordan had 22 in a rout, 103-83 in Game 3. And then from there, we know what happened. Jordan had the big Game 4, and then they go on to win it in 6 games. And they were just a better team. They were always the better team. And they got their act together. The Knicks had a couple of chances for a couple of years there. But it would have taken finding that second secure scorer and them just playing over their heads a little bit. They never could do that. In Game 3, they got back on solid ground. They went on to a romp and win. And then Game 4, and then away we go. And they win it in 6 games. So we have a couple more of the Jordan episodes to go. You saw a lot of the stuff about Kukoc and how they shut Kukoc down in the Olympics and a lot of that stuff yesterday. And you're getting ready to start the 98 playoffs for the Last Dance as we move into the later stages of this now. That's pretty much what we were up to. With Pippen having come back in the second half of the year, having missed the first half of the year, and they're getting ready for their Last Dance, which they will over the last 4 weeks of this regular, 4 episodes of this documentary. As we get ready for 7 and 8, someone told me 7 was the best of the shows. That number 7 coming up is the best show of all. We'll see. It's been good. It hasn't been great, but it's been good. It's been fun to go back and look at some of that stuff and remember some of that stuff as last night. And I remember that series well. And I have to tell you that after Game 2, I remember going to Game 3 saying, I think something could be missing here, but not enough. They still couldn't. I mean, there were a lot of close games. Game 5 was a really close game. Game 6 wasn't a one-sided game. Game 5 was a really close game, but just not enough. Just not enough. They were never the better team, and they never had the second guy who could do the scoring. They never had that guy who could step up and do that scoring for Ewing. Like in Game 3 where Jordan had 22 and Pippen had 29, that was big. So today we remember the passing of Don Shula, The weather gets nicer as it was over the weekend. And they're going to start to open things up. I mean, they know they have to, and they're starting to do that. And it's going to happen little by little. Sports is going to be the last part of this. There's no way around it. That's just the way it fits this time. But I don't get the messaging. I really don't. Just the fascination today with how many people are going to die. They've changed the directive or the number or the projection like 5 times in the last 10 days. What's the point? What is the point of changing the projection as it goes up? We all know already that the projections have been all over the place. Nobody in our country thought there were going to be millions of people killed by this. Nobody even really took it seriously in January or February, including our government, which was a big mistake. And you had no projections then. And then, as we saw things unfold, there were early projections, but who cares? Yes, we're going to lose a lot of people. We're still losing people. It's not about hitting the projection right. And unfortunately, and this is, I keep coming back to this because I think it's a big point. Too much is about what's going to happen in November. And making sure, well, if this wasn't done, we would have lost this many people. So how many we lose, even if we lose 150,000, it would have been 500,000 or it would have been 1 million. So remember that. That's not what it's about. And that's why I really believe that our country has to look into. And this year, I think, just completely just emblazons why it is so important. Nobody should be running for president from the Oval Office. Nobody. Have a president, have one term. As a matter of fact, I think they should redo the whole government. I think you should have one term as president, it should be 6 years. I think you should have 2 terms as a senator and 3 terms as a congressman. That's it. You're out. No lifetime people. Now, if you want to go from being a congressman to a senator or from a senator to a president, so be it. You can work 12 years as a senator and then work 6 years as a president. Absolutely. You just can't work 2 terms as a president. 1 6-year term so that you know you're never running for re-election. You're never raising money for a campaign. You're never spending 1 minute in the Oval Office worried about getting reelected. And we all know every president who has been in there has done that. Truman went on a whistle-stop tour when he was running against Dewey while he was president. He had a campaign. Presidents, if they're running again, have to campaign. Have no choice. And they have to raise money. And that should not be their job. Their job should be to run the country and not worry about that stuff again. That's why 1 6-year term makes so much sense. And, you know, I really have given this a lot of thought because I've had a couple of conversations with people who have never been Trump fans and they're not Trump fans. They're still not Trump fans. People who voted for Trump the first time and are still avid Trump supporters, and people who were Trump supporters who are this way, that way about what happens now in November. So there's 3 categories, and they're in all 3 camps. That's not what this is about. And I think this is where sometimes you get lost, and I think this is where President Trump's gotten lost a little bit. when you run for president, when you have the unmitigated goal to run for president, just think about what it takes to run for president. You think you have what it takes to run for the position where you are then the most powerful man in the world. You are the leader of the greatest country the world has ever known. And you think you can fill that job. It takes a lot of ego. It takes a lot of self-esteem. It takes a lot of chutzpah to even run for that job. Without any question. And it takes more so if you're not a career politician, as Trump wasn't, to do that. But here's what I really believe about the presidency, and I have great respect for the presidency. I will always call the president Mr. President. I don't make derogatory remarks about any president, even if I don't agree with everything he does. And I can't remember agreeing with anything every president's done except for Kennedy, who I idolized. And I was too young to know the difference. Every president I can remember, I've found fault with something he's done. Some I liked, some I didn't like. Some I voted for, some I didn't vote for. I voted for Trump. And why did I vote for him? Okay, people have asked me that. I voted for him because I thought he was a winner, and he proved that he was. He beat 16 people in a wide Republican field out of nowhere. Came out of absolutely nowhere and did something that I don't know if anybody could ever do again. And I thought that he would be a unique problem solver in that he would look at things differently. And I think what he has to remember is, you wanted this job. You wanted to be president of the United States. You wanted to be the most powerful man in the world. You thought what you had, what it took to earn that job, and you sought that job. When you seek that job, that means you understand what comes with it. And what comes with it is maybe nothing. Maybe 4 years of picking up the phone and ordering the helicopter and looking at M&Ms with your face on them and the presidential seal on the other side, and, a lot of hail to the chief and not much else. Maybe not a lot happens in those years. But then there's other presidencies where everything happens. And you know what? When that happens, it's up to you to fix it. This is the job you wanted. You understood that there might be a time where it's all on you. Truman is the perfect example. He didn't want to be vice president. Roosevelt said, you'll do it and you'll shut up. That's how Roosevelt ran the party in those days. And Roosevelt picked him to run as vice president before he ever met him. Had one meeting with him before he got elected. One meeting. And he winds up being president. When he was president, he didn't even know what the Manhattan Project was until he got into office. He didn't even know that it was an atomic weapon. And then he had to make the decision on whether or not to drop that bomb. He couldn't say, wait a second. Let me look at some poll. Wait a second. What is this going to do to my, favorable and my unfavorables? What about if I want to run again? He had a decision to make, and he also made a statement, the buck stops here. And that's what has to happen if you're the president. You can't punt your responsibility when you're the president. If the world dumps it on your desk, tough. You wanted the job. It might come to that. And some presidencies, it's going to come to that. And when it does, you do it. You walk into the presidency, you got a couple of guys, you got a couple of military guys who tell you, hey, Ike was planning this. And you got a CIA guy from Dulles telling you, this plan can't miss. We're going to take Castro out. And you go along with it because you're a green president and you want to go along with the guys who have been there under Eisenhower, and the thing flops and it's in your lap and you're John F. Kennedy and it's the Bay of Pigs and you're embarrassed, you're mortified by the world, mortified to the world for this mishmash that turned out to be a disaster. You attacked and you got your lunch. So what did you do? You went in front of the country and apologized. And your approval rating went up 20%. You took it like a man. You didn't whine. You didn't blame somebody else. You took it and said, it's on me. I did it. And then you went back in and you handed those guys their lunch. And next time when they came to you with a plan, you didn't listen to them, and you became a hero, along with Khrushchev, thankfully, with the Cuban Missile Crisis, because you didn't listen to what they wanted to do. You learned your lesson in the Bay of Pigs, that they didn't have all the answers. And you became a president after getting your lunch the first time in front of the country. You decided to be president. Forget the polls. Forget November. Forget blaming everybody else and putting it on the states and putting it. This is on you. Nobody, you didn't sign up for this virus. But you know what? It's yours. You're the president. And that's what's missing here. Now George Bush comes out and says something and Trump jumps all over him. You know what? He was just trying to unify the country. That's your job. Not to separate red state and blue state. Your job now is to unify during a crisis and let the chips fall where they may in November. If you don't straighten this mess out, you're not going to get elected dog catcher in November. If you do straighten it out, you're going to get elected. But this is the job you wanted. You had the gall, you had the nerve to want to be president of the United States, which means there comes a point where the buck stops here. It's your job. You own it. There's nowhere else to look. Don't look at a poll. When Truman had to deal with MacArthur, he didn't look at the poll. When Truman had to look at Israel and make a decision about Israel, he didn't look at a poll. And when Truman left after upsetting Dewey and left and decided not to run again, which he could have in 52, he left with an approval rating of 30%. And within 5 or 6 years, he was considered one of the greatest presidents of all time when people got a chance to look at what he had really done and understand the decisions he made and why he made them and what he did for the country. History will be either very good or very bad to you. It won't happen in real time. It never does for presidents. And I understand you got people running polls at you every day and telling you to handle it this way and blaming this person and do that. But you know what? That's not what the country needs right now. The country needs a president and somebody to lead. And that's what has to happen because you wanted this job. That's part of taking this job. You know what? Nobody should want that job. It's probably too hard for one guy to do. And there's probably a lot of luck of which way the ball's going to bounce during that job to begin with. And it takes a very special person to do it. And you don't know which way history is going to work. Sometimes you're going to get an easy ride, and sometimes it's going to get dumped right on your lap. And then you got a chance to make it work or don't make it work. You got dealt with a tough situation here. But you know what? Give it your best shot. Stop with all the blame and stop playing all the angles and stop worrying about trying to worry about this poll and this state and how the electoral college looks and how this map looks and play it this way and listen to a bunch of people. Just do what's right for the country and take your best shot. That's all you can do as president. Let the chips fall where they may. That's what's missing. That's really what's missing. Too much blame going on every day and reassigning numbers. And, yes, I know I said last week there were only going to be 60 dead, but now there's 70,000 dead. I think the number will be 98,000. No, let me change it to 120,000. But still, that's way below what we projected. Let me get out the projections. Here's what the doctor said back in March 22nd, that there would be 240,000 dead. Enough of this nonsense. The country needs to be unified, and it needs somebody to lead it. That's what's missing. And you know what? We're not a lot better because all we do is analyze and cheerlead, because that's all we've learned now in this country. This side, that side, this side bad, this side good, this side, nothing ever good on this side, nothing ever bad on that side. It's a bunch of nonsense. You know what? Sometimes one side's right, sometimes the other side's right. There's a problem that has to be solved. And we're in it all together. Or haven't you noticed? Or maybe you like the way this is working out. I think what George Bush did, you know what, was the right tone. Was the right message. That's what was missing. We need more of that. Back after this. And a lot of this debate was made during the time in Jordan's career that Jordan was apolitical, that he was not a political guy. And he wasn't. Let's be honest, he wasn't. He was a ball player. He wasn't a political person. He didn't have a whole lot of other things that he wanted to get involved with. He wasn't the outspoken person about color or culture or any of that stuff. And when he did make a statement about Republicans buy sneakers too, he meant it. What he meant was, hey, I'm a brand, and I spent a lot of time building this brand. And you know what? I'm not alienating half the people by making a statement. Because A, it's not something I believe real deeply in. And B, I'm a businessman. And that's basically... And he wasn't apologizing for that last night. And that's what he was basically saying. I'm a businessman. I'm out for green. I'm not into red states, blue states. I'm into green. And what you learned last night, if you didn't know that, and it's funny, I'm not even sure I knew there was a thing with Jordan and Converse early on. And listen, I'm as dumb as anybody when it comes to Nike because I actually owned Nike stock the year it came out. And it did really well, and I was dumb enough to sell it. And I remember talking to Jim Boeheim once, and he still had the original Nike stock they had given him. I mean, that's smart. That's really smart. I should have taken the Nike stock and taken it that I bought, and I bought it early on. Because I was like, wow, I think that sneaker companies, and I was around college basketball in those days, and I saw that they were making some inroads. And when they went public, I can still remember they went public at $22 a share. I bought the initial offering when it first came out. No one gave me the stock. I bought the stock myself. And it did well, so I sold it. Being a dummy that I was, thinking that was, real smart of me, I probably sold it at $40 a share or something. If I had taken it and tucked it away, and how much it would have been worth? Counting dividend reinvestments and splits, it probably, went up 100 times. It's become one of the great companies in the world. And as you learned in that story last night, Jordan had no interest in Nike. None. He wanted to go with Adidas. He knew there was no room at Converse because he knew at that time, Converse was doing the commercials with Bird and Magic. They used to have the Bird shoe and the Magic shoe, and they'd have, remember, the limousines, and they'd square off and the whole thing. And those guys were locked up, and they were making chicken feed. Phil Knight, who you may realize and Nike was a running shoe. Nike is the goddess of victory, as you know. Well, maybe you learned that when you found that Bill Belichick's dog was named Nike. But Phil Knight, if you know the story, was a walk-on in the great running program at Oregon, where Bob Baberman was the coach, and the coach was a legendary coach, okay? And he used to make players' sneakers on a waffle iron to last one race. And remember, there was a craze then, because the craze was the running and the jogging and the running was a craze then in the country. But the craze was really that they had a runner who had turned his running style in the 3 mile into almost a cult figure. He was a guy by the name of Steve Prefontaine, who became a legendary running figure. I mean, a world-renowned, as you probably know if you've ever seen the movie. And if not, take out the movie Prefontaine and watch it. The one with the blonde-haired guy. Oh, what's his name? What's the guy who played him so well? Oh, I'll think of it. But there were two Prefontaine movies. But the one, I'll get you to which one I want you to. They both, I think, were named Prefontaine. But the one with the blonde-haired actor was the one that I want you to watch. But I'll get his name before I go off the air. But Phil Knight got his running coach, and he was a walk-on at the school, to go into business with him. And he put the swooshes, he put the swoosh on the shoe. And he tried to get Prefontaine to wear the swoosh. And Prefontaine said, "This looks stupid, plus it's going to slow me down." So he took them off. So he wore the shoe, but he didn't have the Nike swoosh on the shoe. He pulled it off, the shoe, when he first started wearing it. And I don't think Pre made money. Remember that guy, Michael O'Hara, started the world track and field event thing. There was a professional track and field league. He paid Prefontaine some $200,000, some outrageous amount of money to join the thing. And Prefontaine was he was literally a cult figure. And Prefontaine died by flipping his MG. He was drunk. He flipped his MG and he died. And, he had run against Lassevere, and Lassevere beat him in the Olympics. And he was trained to go back to the Olympics again. But this guy was this legendary runner, and Nike was built out of that running craze and out of that Oregon program, of which Phil Knight still built all these years. I mean, he built the program, okay? He's the one who built the program, right? So it's the guy who went on to be the famous actor, Jared Leto, the guy who won Academy Award. That's the guy who played Prefontaine. That's the movie you want to see. The guy who went on to win the Academy Award. In the movie, when he had AIDS. I'm trying to remember the movie. Remember the movie where the guy? Oh, he was great in the movie. Matthew McConaughey's in the movie too. Dallas, about buying the drugs. Oh, what's the movie? Dallas. I'll remember it. But it's it was just a couple of years ago, and McConaughey was in it, and Jared Leto was in it. He won the Academy Award for it. So he played Prefontaine, though. He's the movie you want. But Nike was built as a running company. So Jordan didn't want any part of Nike. And you heard that his mother made him go up to Nike for the meeting. He didn't even want to go. He wanted to meet with Adidas. And Nike had this whole plan for him where, hey, we're not just going to have you design a shoe. We're going to have you start a brand inside of Nike where you'll have your own wing. You'll develop. Jordan has sold $1 billion worth of merchandise for Nike. $1 billion in his career. And Jordan, to this day, his shoe sells. Now, I don't know which one sells more in a given year, but his shoe sells right now as well as LeBron's shoe sells. And I can tell you right now that the 3 shoes I've seen my kids wear are Jordans they still wear, LeBron's they wear a lot, and I've seen them wear Curry's shoe. It had nothing to do with Curry, but his shoe was not very popular. And then I've seen them wear a lot of Kevin Garnett's shoes, especially one of these peanut butter and jelly or something like that. He had a shoe that was very hot a couple of years ago. But it's been LeBron and Michael with obviously the Nikes through the years have still sold. They still sell like crazy. So he went, because of his mother, went to Beaverton, Oregon, met with Phil Knight and Nike, and basically has stayed part of Nike his whole life as Nike's become this worldwide force with Jordan. So how amazing is it that his mother told him to go keep the meeting? He wanted no part of Nike, and he winds up going to Nike, and instead of Adidas. Think about what Adidas could have done with Michael Jordan all these years. Now, the other thing is, Jordan was often criticized because unlike a Jim Brown, and listen, Jim Brown was not always one of nature's noblemen. He did a lot of ugly things in his life. He got in trouble at times. Michael's never been in that kind of trouble. The only thing Michael's ever been in trouble for is gambling. Jim Brown had his moments. Jim Brown, though, went and worked in a city, went and worked with a lot of gangs, got involved in socially active causes and stuff. Michael's never done that. It's not been his thing. So, and unlike Ali, now Ali was thrust into a very different situation because they took away his career. So that changed it dramatically. But Jordan was just apolitical. He was a businessman. He wanted to make money with Hanes. He wanted to make money with Gatorade. He wanted to make money with Nike. He wanted to make money with the companies. That's what he cared about. And, they've tried to build up the gambling thing. And let's be honest, Jordan is a freakish gambler. I've actually seen him. I've actually been in the casino with him. And he gambles crazy at the card tables. I mean, he'll play the whole table for big stakes. I've seen him do it. So he will wager a lot of money. But remember, it's all relative. Jordan turned down $1 million appearances on a daily basis. Turned them down. They weren't big enough. Turned down. I'm talking about actual millions of dollars a day in appearances and would turn them down. They weren't big enough. That's how big he was. So the idea you were going to impact him by somebody gambling $1 million. Now, in the beginning, when it first came out that he owed that guy $57,000, and really it was not so much that guy they brought up in the one time in the show. It was really Esquinas that caused the trouble. And I told you once before that the problem with Jordan, and they didn't really get into it last night, was Jordan is a vanity golfer. Unlike a lot of golfers who are professional athletes, they like to say they're better than they are. But around the golf tour, there's guys waiting for you out there. So if you're really a 10, okay, and Jordan had a nice swing, he's got a nice game. Let's say Jordan is legitimately, I don't know what he is right now, but let's say at the time he was a legitimate 8. But he said he was a 4. And the guy who was sandbagging him was a scratch, and he said he was a 4. Jordan's not beating that guy. That guy is going to kill him. He's going to fillet him both sides. He's going to take him on the front side. He's going to double up on him on the back side, and he's going to bury him. And Jordan's going to write him a big check. And that went on all the time. I'll tell you who else used to do the same thing was Lendl. Lendl would say he was better than he was. He was good. But the golfers would tell me that Lendl would say he was a scratch or a 2 when really he was like a 6. Now, 6 is a hell of a golfer. But you don't want to say you're a 2 when you're a 6. Because you know what? You're going to lose to a guy who's scratched and says he's a 2. You're going to be giving him strokes on both sides. He's going to kill you. And that's where Jordan wound up losing a significant amount of money for him, but not for anybody else. I mean, the fact if Jordan wrote a check over a year for $1 million to this guy or $1.5 million, it's chicken feed. It's cab fare. Did he like to gamble? Yes. You saw a little about that last night. Now, they didn't go into it, but it was a little bit of a problem for Phil with the team early on where Jordan would wipe out all their meal money because he would overpower them. If you play cards with someone who has a bigger stake, unless he's a fool, he's going to win because he can bluff you out of hands where if you don't have the bankroll, if he's got thousands of dollars and you have $200, he owns you because he can bluff you right out of hands that you can't stay in. That's how he used to play against the rookies. He used to pound them. And he liked to play all night because he just doesn't sleep. And that's where the trip from Atlantic City came from. Now, the soundbite you saw from me, my point I was making there was I was taken aback by Game 2. I thought something was really missing with them in Game 2 when they lost Game 2. They didn't react like the Bulls that night. Then you couple it with the gambling and you say, maybe something's going on here. Well, as it turned out, the Knicks couldn't back it up because Game 3, the rest of the Bulls came out on fire, including Pippen had a huge game in Game 3, and they ran the Knicks off the court. Then Jordan had a big Game 4, and then they go on and win the game in the series in 6 games. And I'll tell you this, that series that you saw against the Suns, Dog and I went to that series. We went to the finals, that whole series. And that series was hard for the Bulls. And I'll tell you why. Number one, Barkley played out of his mind. He played unbelievably. He was virtually unstoppable. And you know what else? In a very rare, underrated move, Richard Dumas drove Pippen crazy. Pippen couldn't keep Dumas from scoring. Pippen used to shut out everybody, shut out Magic Johnson. He'd shut out anybody. He couldn't stop Richard Dumas. Richard Dumas was killing him. Not only Richard Dumas is getting 30, but Richard Dumas is hitting big shots. He's making big shots. He's getting 20-something this game. He's making, 6 straight shots in this game. Richard Dumas was really hurting them out of nowhere. And he was making big shots. And he had some games where he scored 18 off the bench and have a big, run in the game with 22. Richard Dumas hurt them in that series. And that series was tough. It was a hard series for them. It really was. And I want to give Barkley credit in that series. Barkley played out of his mind. But Jordan had a couple of incredible final games where he was just unstoppable. He had a couple of games where he was on fire in that finals. Just on fire. But they played hard in that series. They played very well, the Suns. They really did. They weren't going to win the series, but they played very hard. They really played hard. And they played well. And I thought Barkley, I'm telling you, he never played better. Barkley was a hard cover for anybody anyway because he was a freak. You couldn't stop Barkley from scoring. Nobody could. Barkley was a freakishly good player. When he was on his game and in his right temperament and on his game, he could be really tough. And he was great in that series. He really was. He put up some big numbers in that series. And that was a very, very tough final against the Suns that year. It really was. Now, they never went in any one of the 6 series. They never won 7 games. Not one time did they go to a 7th game. And not one time in those finals did they ever play 7th game. A lot of 6s, but never played 7. When we come back, we'll hit the fan.
Mike's on. He's ready to go. On the Fan, New York Sports Radio. Mike's on, Mike's on. He'll get you the sports any way that he can. It's Mike Francesa on the Fan. Sports Radio 66 and 101.9 FM, WFAN.
All right, on this Monday evening, we come to you a little after 6 o'clock, brought to you by Casamigos Tequila, brought to you by those who drink it. After a quiet weekend. Oh, it's a beautiful weekend, though. It was nice, though. The weather was nice for a change. Today, a little chillier. It rained a little bit this afternoon, but Saturday and Sunday were really nice. I mean, just beautiful weather. Almost summer-like weather the last couple of days. Saturday was a little cooler. Yesterday was almost like summery. And I'm sure everybody got out of the house at least for a couple of minutes as we try to figure things out here in May. Not that we've figured things out any better in the last couple of days than we had the days before that. And I know it is getting, I would say, alarmingly frustrating by the day. First, let me say that that's Dallas Buyers Club was the movie I was thinking of. I couldn't remember the full name of it, but the Dallas Buyers Club was a depressing movie, but very well acted by McConaughey, and Jennifer Garner was very good in it too, and also Jared Leto, who was the guy who I talked about who played Prefontaine in the good Prefontaine movie. The other one was okay, but that movie's pretty good. And the reason I brought Prefontaine up is because of the fact that I was making the point that Jordan was reluctant to go with Nike because he thought Nike is a running shoe. And the reason why it was a running shoe was because Phil Knight had been part of the great Oregon running program as a walk-on. And that was the program that Prefontaine took to national celebrity. Their coach was a legendary coach and an Olympic coach. And he actually presided over a rough Olympics, as you know, because he was there when they didn't do well, and he was always also there during the horrific, as is big part of the movie, and they had to postpone one of Prefontaine's races and do it later in the meet and later in the schedule because of what happened, obviously, at the Olympics. So it was, the, horrific Olympic assassinations and the killings and everything that went on with the Israeli team, which was, it's just so horrific. That he was caught up in a big part of that during that time, and that's a big part of the movie, as a matter of fact, and impacted that Olympic Games. And then he was trying to go back and race against them at another Olympics, and he raced against the great Finn racer, Lasse Viren, and he wound up beating him in what was a classic race, as a matter of fact. But that was a big part of it. But that was why Jordan was reluctant to go with Nike, which they made a big part of in the documentary last night. And it was his mother that made him keep his appointments and go visit the Nike campus, as it is in Beaverton, Oregon. And they put forth such an incredible presentation that Jordan was all in. And, $1 billion later, Jordan has a sneaker brand for the ages, one that still sells dramatically. Today, as a matter of fact, if you go into a sporting goods store, like a Dick's sporting goods store, they have a Jordan wing. They have a whole part that's just Jordan stuff. I mean, every part of it is just Jordan sneakers, Jordan jerseys, and, workout gear and everything else. I mean, it's all Jordan. And this is, how many years after he has retired? Think about a guy having that kind of appeal all these years later, that the remarkable appeal that he still has to sell equipment. And you can see, it's been brought up that one of the reasons why Jordan gave permission to this thing and got involved is because of he wanted to, re-shine his star a little bit because of the attention being paid to LeBron. You can see that when you realize how many times Jordan says, well, they actually dared to compare this guy to me, or dared to compare this guy to me, or this guy thought he could guard me, or this guy thought he could. And he's mentioned guys who, let's be honest, Clyde Drexler was a very good player. He was not Michael Jordan. Who in their right mind thought Dan Marley could shut down Michael Jordan? Okay, these are the kind of things. Now, there were a couple of guys that Michael didn't love. He didn't love Isaiah, which we all know. That goes way back. He didn't love Reggie Miller. So, and, Reggie had his unique ability. Reggie didn't care. And Reggie would stop and make a shot on anybody, anytime, anywhere. The bigger the shot, the bigger the chance that Reggie was going to make it. I mean, that's all there was to it. Reggie's one of the few guys who was as good at the end of the game as Michael was. He wasn't as good the whole game. He wasn't nearly as good, and he wasn't a very good all-around player. But he was, at the end of the game, with one shot on the line, he was as good as Michael was. I mean, he's one of the few guys. You could put maybe 3 or 4 guys you're going to put on that level. You're going to put Reggie there. You're going to put Michael there. You're going to put Jerry West there. Curry has that ability, although I don't know that he's made as many shots as some of these other guys have. Sam Jones was another one, a Celtic great who had a habit for making last shots. Those would be the guys that you would put on that first wave of that group of guys who just were uncanny. Reggie was uncanny, let's be honest. And he really was. But those were the 2 guys that Jordan really had an issue with. Well, Reggie won. Isaiah won. And Reggie too. And they can say that everyone kept Isaiah off that Olympic team. Let's be honest. We all know Michael kept him off that Olympic team. Michael was the man on that Olympic team. They made it seem like Michael became the man during that Olympic team. Michael was the man before that Olympic team. So that's all there was to it. He was already the guy. And yes, there was this Magic Michael stuff that they talked about and all the trash talking and all the great stuff. And that was a great story because I think Magic had that kind of competitiveness. And let's be honest, Magic Johnson, Larry Bird, those guys, they don't take a backseat to anybody. Those guys could play with anybody, including Michael. Was Michael better? Yes, he was better. Because the difference between Michael and Larry and Magic is Michael could also stop you on the other end of the floor. Those guys couldn't. Larry could score if anybody who ever lived. Magic could score if anybody who ever lived. Michael could score if anybody who lived. Michael could stop you from scoring, though. The other 2 guys couldn't. They weren't those kind of defenders. Michael was that kind of defender. He was an all-world defender, which is why when they were in their mood, when they had Michael and Scotty and a motivated Ron Harper who allowed you to switch everything, or Horace when he was motivated, not whining, or Rodman when he was paying attention. Those are as good a defensive teams as you could ever have. And you had in Jordan a great defender, and in Pippen as good a perimeter defender as anyone's ever played the sport. So you had incredible defensive prowess, which has always been overlooked by those teams. Those teams, I always said this, Jordan would make a last shot, and Jordan was going to score a lot of points whether he took some nights he would take 15 shots and sometimes he would take 30 shots. It depended on the game. He was going to get his 30 points. The question was how many shots it was going to take him. Some nights it was going to take him a whole bunch of shots and he'd miss a bunch. Some nights he would make all of the shots. That was the night, and you'd go that way. If he was going to make all the shots, it wasn't going to be a close game. If he was going to miss a whole bunch of shots to get his 35, well, he's still going to get his 35. He's just going to take a whole bunch of shots that night. A lot of nights the mix made him take a whole bunch of shots, but they were still shooting 30%. That was the difference because the Bulls always brought their defense in those games. And what the Bulls had was an ability to slash and burn and kill you with those. They take the ball away and transition and get running on that transition. And then you got Jordan in the lane, and you got Pippen in the lane, and you got Jordan following Pippen, Pippen following Jordan. And there was a lot to handle. And then you'd kick it out once in a while. And on that last play that you saw at the end of the game, Pippen hit a wide-open Horace who, instead of shooting it, throws it to Paxson, who's wide open, and Paxson makes a shot. And if you were Paxson or B.J. Armstrong or Kerr, your job was to make the shot. That was what you were there for. You were there to make the shot. And a lot of times those guys did, whether it was Kerr or whether it was B.J. Armstrong, or whether it was John Paxson. They were good at making a shot. That was their job. You know, it would be a kick and throw it to one of those guys who was wide open, and that was it. Back after this. The game I was alluding to with Dumas was the Game 5 where the Bulls think they're going to wrap it up, and the Suns beat them in Game 5. Dumas went 12 for 14 from the floor in that game and scored 25 points. 12 for 14. Now, in that game, Jordan had 44 and Pippen had 26 and 10 rebounds and 9 assists. But they both took a lot of shots in that game. But Dumas went 12 for 14 in that game. And, he had 17 one night, and then that game he had 25. And they weren't expecting that because they had KJ who scored. You had Barkley, and you had KJ, and you had Marley. And then they were getting it from Dumas, which they were like, what the heck is, what is this about? Where is this coming from? We got to make sure this doesn't happen again. I mean, because we know we're going to have to deal with KJ. We know we're going to have to deal with Marley and deal with Barkley, but we weren't expecting to deal with so they're down 3-1, and they win that game 108-98 and, make it 3-2. And Dumas goes 12 for 14 in 30 minutes of play and scores 25 points. Barkley scores 24. KJ gets 25. And in that game, Jordan gets 41 and Pippen gets 22 and 12 rebounds. But Jordan took like 30-something shots in that game. And then the last game, they win 99-98 in Game 6. Oh, that series was tough on them because they lost that Game 5, and that was the game where Dumas had 17 one game and then 25 the other game, and that was the big surprise. They weren't expecting that. But that was a good team because they had KJ, they had Dan Marley, KJ, Barkley playing well, and then Dumas playing well. And, the Bulls were looking for that third scorer. Where were they going to get it from? Because, you were going to get – Pippen was going to get in his 20s. Jordan was going to get somewhere around 35. Some game 40, some game 30, but pretty much was going to break 30 every night. I mean, a couple of games in that series, he took a lot of shots. One game in that series, he took 40-something shots. That was that overtime game. He took, I think, 43 or 44 shots in that game. I mean, think about that. That's a lot of shots in a game, 43, 44 shots. But he would just keep hoisting away because, they needed those two to score. And they were going to play a lot of minutes. And then one night they get it from Armstrong. One night they get it from Grant. One night they get it from somebody else. So, I mean, they were looking to find that third scorer. But, it was going to be those two. It was going to be Jordan was going to be in the mid-30s to high 30s most of those nights. And Pippen was going to be, somewhere between 22 and 25, 26 in most of those games. And that was how they scored. That was pretty much their offense. And then he had to do the other stuff. He'd get his 10 rebounds. He'd get a bunch of assists. He'd have to fill up the board, get a bunch of steals, do that stuff. So that was a tough series, though, because, KJ gave him speed. Dumas made some shots. Barkley inside. I mean, they played well. That series was a tough series for him. It really was. But I remember that because we actually went to that finals. We stayed with them that year because we actually went, and I remember going to the Phoenix series, and it turned out to be a good series. We used to love to go to Chicago for those series. We used to go a lot. So we spent a lot of time in that building through those years. And obviously the Knicks, who thought a couple of times they had their chances, just couldn't get past them. No matter what they did, they just couldn't get past them. I mentioned on the radio.com hour, I didn't mention yet on this program, obviously, the passing of Don Shula. There's no face that was more symbolic of the NFL other than Vince Lombardi's. And then when Lombardi was gone, there was Shula. I mean, Shula was the standard. He was there. He was winning. He was there every year. He was a very important guy. He was, the main thrust of the competition committee. What he said went, that was it. Shula was, you had Shula and you had Landry, and they were on the same plane. They were, big winners but they also were guys that were known to be clean cut. They did it their way, and, that was it. That you had those two guys. And the amazing thing, as Shula won more, he started coaching at a very young age. He was a head coach at 32 or 33. I think it was either one or the other. I think it was 33. Obviously lost that championship to the Jets and the Namath with that, crazy game with the Colts. That game bothered him a lot. Went to the Dolphins, lost his first Super Bowl. Remember, he gets to the Super Bowl and gets beat by the Cowboys and Landry and Staubach 24-3. But comes back off that and wins back-to-back Super Bowls, including the perfect season. And the perfect season meant a great deal to them because there's two things that really stand out for Shula. Number one, he's the winningest coach of all time. Number two, he coached the only perfect team in the history of the sport. Lombardi didn't do that. Paul Brown didn't do that. Tom Landry didn't do that. Bill Belichick didn't do that. Don Shula did it. Now, the amazing thing, Shula has a losing record in the Super Bowl. The other thing is how it's shocking that Shula and Dan Marino, as good as Shula was, as good as Dan Marino was, it's amazing they did not team up and win a title. That is almost hard. And when you look back on their history, it's almost hard to fathom that those two would be together as they were and not able to win a championship together. But, year after year, Shula was there. And Joe Brown, the longtime executive who lives near me and he texts me sometimes and I see him from time to time, he told me that there was a time, think about this, Jet fans, where Shula almost came up to coach the Jets. And the plan was that Shula was going to coach him for a couple of years and then hand him off to his son. How about that if that had happened? I never heard that story till today. Joe Brown told me that story today. He said, Shula came close once to coaching the Jets. I said, I never heard that. How about that? And he said the deal was he was just going to coach him for a year or two and then turn him over to his son. Imagine if that, think about how history might have changed if that had ever happened. How about that? Well, I never heard that he came close to coaching another team. But when you think about the league and you think about coaches, you obviously see Lombardi. You obviously see the man in the hat and Landry. And you see Paul Brown. And future generations will see the hoodie in Belichick. But there was Shula, rock-jawed, always there with that same look. And he was the NFL. Shula's profile is one of the profiles that is enduring to the National Football League. If you were going to paint 5 portraits in the history of the National Football League, you would paint Don Shula's as one of them. That's how big he was. You cannot overstate Shula's importance to the National Football League. That's how big it was. So if you're young enough and you're like, what's the fuss about this 90-year-old guy who died? Go back and look and you'll see what the fuss was. He's the winningest coach ever. He coached the only undefeated team ever. And he was a standard in this league for a very, very long time. That was Shula. That's all there was to it. Hey, who are you playing against this week? Playing against Shula. That's it. It was Shula. So he was that big. This is one of the enduring icons in the history of football. That's who passed today. Lived a very long life, had a great life. He had a lot of success. He had a lot of success in football. He had a lot of success in life. His Shula steakhouses were very successful. I think everything he touched, he was Mr. Florida. He was Mr. Miami. Real estate, developments, this, that. Shula was enormous. He had a great life. He lived 90 years. and he will long be remembered as one of the true giants of the sport. Casamigos Tequila brings you the program as it does each and every night, brought to you by those who drink it. You got baseball coming up, as always. They give you a baseball game. Who knows? Maybe sometime we'll get out of each other's way and we'll figure out some way to bring back real baseball to this country. I don't know when, but who knows? Hope springs eternal. Stay safe. Baseball's next. We'll see you tomorrow.